Starfish Leaders Podcast. Starfish leaders are committed to unlocking the collective strength, intelligence, and impact of every leader and every human influence. Starfish leaders see family trees, not org charts. Let's be honest, the weight of top-down, disempowering, highly centralized leadership is crushing the church, burning out leaders, and increasing the cynicism of those outside the faith. We hope this podcast and our book, The Starfish the Superiority, will inspire and equip you and others to rediscover a form of leadership that unleashes joy, flourishing, builds community, lightens the load, equips everyone, and unlocks the disciples, leaders, and
Hey, welcome to the next episode of the Starfish in the Church. Today, I am very, very excited. I almost didn't make it. My van broke down this morning. I had to get a lift to get here, but we have overcome the evil one. I am here with Dr. Longa and Matt Millar this morning. They are the co-authors of The Church in Context, Harnessing Cultural Humility for Kingdom Advancement. They are both leaders I deeply respect. They have deep experience in cross-cultural mission and disciple making. They both bring really deep insight into cultural intelligence and humility that need to deeply shape missional and incarnational engagement. We so need this in the Western context. Increasingly, as we're trying to make disciples in the Western context, we're running into so much cultural complexity. We now live in a pure missionary context, which requires us to be able to have this kind of cultural intelligence. And today we're going to talk about how do we cultivate that kind of awareness, those skills, that inner posture that's needed to contextualize the message of Jesus while resisting the impulse to colonize, to oppress. And unfortunately, there's a deep history of that in the story of our nation. So, gentlemen, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Hey, why don't you each take like just a minute to introduce yourselves to this kind of Starfish family that's here listening today. Matt, why don't you start? Let them know a little bit about who you are and what you're up to.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Thank you for the invitation. Awesome to be here. Super excited to share about cultural humility, cultural intelligence. I live in Nairobi, Kenya. Grew up in southern Wisconsin, small little town, village, predominantly, I mean, when I say predominantly white, we were 7,995 white middle-class Americans, and then found myself in Nairobi, Kenya, where it was very much different. From Nairobi, moved to Liberia, planted a church. From there, moved to downtown Chicago, planted a church, and have been serving with New Thing now for the last 10 years, both in sub-Saharan Africa and then as a global operations director. And this idea of cultural intelligence has really just become a heartbeat of mine and something that I see the church globally really needs.
Fantastic, brother. It's been a joy to serve with you over these last decade, my man. And Dr. Longa.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, for the opportunity of, just being part of this amazing experience. I'm Augustin Longa, originally from Cameroon. This is Central Africa, and calling from Côte d'Ivoire, living in Côte d'Ivoire, which is West Africa. So you understand that, where I am, what I do is connected to constant variations, constant interactions with people with different mindsets, people living in different concepts. From my original, setting, I've been serving as a missionary in the north of Chad, bordering the Sudan, served in northern Nigeria, served in northern Cameroon, and now living in Côte d'Ivoire. This is the fifth country. I've moved with my family in 5 countries now, serving different types of people. I hope you understand that a ministry like this can only, enforce the necessity of being, just culturally humble and culturally intelligent. You need these things if you want to drive out the message properly. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Brothers, as we begin, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball to you. This is obviously a calling for you, a passion for you. You don't write a book, you don't create immersive experiences like you have if it's not a calling. And I wonder if you each could briefly share how is it that Jesus has shaped this calling in your life? What is it that you've seen um, in your personal journey with the Lord that has made this something that you've wanted to give so much of your ministry life to?
Dr. Longa, would you like to go first or me?
That's good. Move on.
All right. Let me see if I can keep this short. It's so when I first moved to Kenya, I was 25 years old. I had never left the country. I'd never lived outside of that one town that I told you I grew up in, and um, I was working at a large church in Nairobi. And 7 months later, I sat down with the executive pastor and I said, I think I'm finally ready to meaningfully engage with Kenyans. I'd been there for 7 months. But I didn't know the government. I didn't know the sports. I didn't know the humor. I didn't know the music. I didn't know the movies. They didn't talk about weather because it's always 80 and sunny every day. So there was no conversation starters for me. So 7 months later, I finally felt like I could have a conversation. Not that I could have a deep relationship, just a meaningful conversation. And then when I was sent to Liberia, it was kind of the same thing. Now from East Africa to West Africa, now I'm planning a church and I don't know how to interact with these people because they had 14 years of war. It's a very different culture, very different history. Freed American slaves were sent back to Liberia as this was supposed to be a colony of slaves who were supposed to have their own space. And there was all these different dynamics, and I just didn't know how to interact with people. Then, like I said, moved to Chicago, planted a church in the city. Now we have Pakistanis, we have Ukrainians, we have Italians, we have Black Americans, we have just all of this multicultural nature, and each person needs to be interacted with differently. And I had no clue. From there, the Bishop Oscar Muriu, who I worked with in Kenya, he said, Matt, you've had some cross-cultural experiences. Before you come back to Kenya, go to Toronto, Canada, spend 6 months learning from these three different organizations how they train their pre-field missionaries. And he said, take the best of what each of them do, because as we've sent out missionaries from Kenya, we've really not prepared them for culture. And so they're coming back with cultural stress, with cultural issues. And it's not the theology. We've taught them how to lead a church, but we haven't taught them how to engage with people. And so from that, I was like, wow, there's this huge gap. And so I came back, started training Kenyans, and then put all of that together into a training that I formalized into a book, and now another training that we do. And as a global operations director from with New Thing and even within Sub-Saharan Africa, I realized that we're making a lot of the same mistakes we made in colonialism, in the Crusades, in some of the history of the church that has just been really, really unfortunate and damaging. We're making a lot of the same mistakes, just differently. So we've, together, Dr. Longa and I have traveled to, I think, over 90 countries collaboratively, and we both have realized the same thing. Nobody's ever taught us how to be culturally intelligent and culturally humble, and we don't feel like we'll ever take the Great Commission to the Great Completion unless we can engage meaningfully with people, because our good intentions aren't good enough. They push people away from the church. And I can keep going on and on and on and on, but let me transition to my brother.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we are suffering from the same sickness. you know, that, you know, globally, when you go through church history, the tendency has generally been taking the gospel from somewhere to the rest. It is, it's been from Jerusalem to the rest of the world. Then later, from Antioch to the rest of the world. It has generally been that type of move. And when we step into the early 19th century, it's been from the West to the West. But, the narrative has totally changed. It's no more about from somewhere to everywhere. It has to do from everywhere to everywhere. Because, the whole world has been scrambled. It's, you know, if we want to reach the world, we need to move from everywhere to everywhere. And there is no how we can move from everywhere to everywhere without integrating the different components, the different cultural components in the gospel narrative. My grandmother, you know, uh, he was just like, I'm happy, it was longer. I heard you're now the servant of God, but you know, that God is not from our tribe. Everything you do is foreign. You know, the way you teach the word, the book you use to teach the word, the song you sing, everything you do is totally different from who we belong, from where we belong. When are we going to have a God that addresses to us in ways that are going to appeal to us? You know, those are big questions. This is one of the conversations that really changed my mindset. And, you know, I started brainstorming and thinking, am I really preaching Jesus? Am I really introducing Jesus to others if they can identify to him as their own God? So it raises up a lot, and the whole aspect of cultural intelligence, getting to just developing this hunger to know how people process information, how they view the world, what could be their own systems of value, their own beliefs, and how can we navigate from there into the good news of the gospel. Cultural intelligence just became something I had to integrate in my process. But as you become culturally intelligent, what comes up is humility. We're going to talk about it. So these two components are so key, and you can't just be a cross-cultural worker. You can interact with others without inviting these two key elements in your ministry approach. I have to stop here before I take over the whole show.
Well, let's break that down. What is the framework of cultural intelligence? I'd love to hear you
Yeah,
both break that down.
awesome. And so
Right.
we often, and even Dr. Longa and I do it, and we'll often use them interchangeably, cultural intelligence and cultural humility. But when we talk about them in depth, we're really talking about two separate things. So cultural intelligence is really the competence, where cultural humility is the lifestyle, it's the posture, it's the inner work, it's more of the inside than the outside. So cultural
Mm,
intelligence, it's CQ framework. A friend of mine, Dr. David Livermore, and some of his friends put this together a few years ago. And so that's kind of the competency that we're talking about. And there's four components of the cultural intelligence framework. It starts with CQ drive. So cultural intelligence drive. Am I excited about this interaction? Is there intrinsic or extrinsic value? And where's my motivation? And so that's the first level, just kind of figuring out, what is it that I'm excited about or not excited about, and acknowledging that. So that's one. Number two is CQ knowledge. This is the cognitive level. And then there's two components of that. There's the general cultural knowledge, and then there's the content specific knowledge. So we go from what is my motivation in the CQ drive to gaining knowledge in the cognitive component in CQ knowledge. And then the third is CQ strategy. Now here we're planning, we're trying to raise awareness internally, being aware of what's happening around us, and we're continually checking back and evaluating our interactions. And so what is my strategy? Now that I understand, I have excitement for this, I understand some of the knowledge of this context, what is my strategy for engaging with people meaningfully? And then the last one is the CQ action. This is the behavioral component. Now I put my strategy together, let me act it out. This is verbal behavior, nonverbal behavior, how I talk, the mechanisms and the mannerisms that I use. And so that's more of the competence. This can be learned. It's easy, like repetitive. You can repeat this many, many times, and it's very, very helpful when you're trying to go into a new place because it gives you actionable items that you're able to follow.
Okay,
With that,
a question
mhm,
for clarity. Okay, so drive has to do with motivation, like
yep.
where am I coming from? Knowledge, you talked about two different components. Can you repeat those again?
So it was the general knowledge about culture. We are generally across the world, we are culturally illiterate. We don't
Yep.
understand the dynamics that make culture culture. And then the second part was now context specific knowledge. So if I'm
Okay.
going to go into Northern Cameroon, I want to learn something, I want to increase my knowledge about the Northern Cameroonian, the history, the interactions, the people.
So the general knowledge, unpack that a little bit. Are you talking about like overall categories like there's hot climate cultures and cold climate cultures? Is that what you mean?
Yes. So how was culture formed? It's helpful to know
Okay.
the formation of culture. That's a big one. And so we talk about that in a couple different places. How is culture formed? What is culture? Give a definition of culture. How does culture manifest as an individual, as a collective group? And then, yeah, those spectrums, indirect versus
So,
direct.
so what is culture? What's culture? What is it anyway? Come
Culture
on,
is like
tell us what
leadership.
it is, guys.
Culture is like leadership. There is as many definitions for leadership as there is culture. And so it really depends who you're talking to. Basically, for me, it is a
I want to know what you
compilation.
guys say. That's why you're here. What do you guys take
Well,
culture?
let me kick it to Dr. Longo. I'll put him on the hot
Yeah,
seat.
Dr. Longo,
And
what is culture?
he's the PhD of the two of
That's the
us.
most that's the most complex question. you know, something interesting about culture is that uh, you don't want to define culture based on people's behaviors. You don't want to define culture based on exclusively on their traditions. Behaviors, traditions are expressions of culture. Culture is rooted on the world view. Every specific people group within, within a cultural, within a geographical location, uh, people group within that space have a way of viewing life, and that way of viewing life is enforced by their context. So the worldview is the core component of the culture, and
Hmm.
it's based on this worldview that people would develop their systems of belief. So culture is rooted on the worldview, and the major output of a people's worldview is their system of belief. Yeah. So, and it's based on what people believe that they can define their value systems. And now it's from the value systems that people have behaviors and traditions. The
Got it.
culture in the architecture of of culture has four layers: the worldview, the system of belief, the system of value, and finally traditions and behaviors. So these are
Okay.
the four major components, and you can frame a sentence to define it literally based on what you get from this architecture. Yeah.
And
Very
Rob,
helpful.
if I
So it's almost like the worldview is the root, and then the behaviors are the fruit. Is that right? Am I understanding correctly?
Yep.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why
That's
it's so
just it.
important for us within the church is because often we work on behavior modification, which is that top level, but really we need to
Yep.
be concerned about the worldview. If we don't change the worldview, then the beliefs, which Dr. Longa
Yeah.
said, worldview, beliefs, values, actions. If we don't get to the worldview level, if
Hmm.
people's minds aren't renewed, then there's never transformation. And then we're never actually moving the church forward. We're just, everybody's acting more Christian, whatever that means for your context and culture.
And I imagine I've seen this a lot, where people that are engaging other cultures, they get fixated on the differences in the behavior, easily confused, easily offended, easily comparing and contrasting, and not at all trying to move past the surface comparisons, being curious about the why of the worldview or the
Uh,
beliefs. So I'm
Zita,
curious,
Zita,
how is it that you help
come
people
please.
move beyond getting stuck at the differences or the offense at the at the
Come
fruit
with your
level, at the
phone.
behavior or the action
You
level?
have internet.
And I know that's kind of where we
Bring your
probably
phone,
start to
please.
get into this
Share
framework
your
of cultural
internet with me.
humility. What is cultural humility? How do you cultivate it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a journey like
Yeah.
anything else. Because in so many ways, cultural humility is a large part of becoming like Jesus. And so cultural
Hmm.
humility is both a means, but it's also the end. It's not just so cultural intelligence could be a means to an end. Cultural humility is a means and the end in itself, because I believe that heaven is going to be filled with culturally humble men and women of God from all over the world. And so the idea is to be formed more like Jesus. And for us, it's a large part of that is being culturally humble so that we can all be together in this dynamic of cultural humility. And so when we talk about it, we make sure people know this is not just a means to an end. It's not just a pipeline to get people saved. It's not just a way in which we act and talk and interact so that we can get what we want, which is a big part of the framework that Jesus showed us in his life and what we've used for cultural humility. So maybe I'll just jump into that real quick.
Yeah,
So
let's do it.
The four components that we see, as Dr. Long and I have studied scripture, had conversations, and just looked and prayed about this. First and foremost, it starts with love. And this is an issue of motivation. And pure love expects nothing in return. So Jesus came without coercion. He came without manipulation. He came without self-aggrandizement. There was no obligation. It wasn't for numbers. It wasn't for fame, for renown. He came out of a deep and desperate love for the people who were lost. And so that's where it starts. From love, Jesus submitted himself. Philippians 2:7, he emptied himself. He willingly became helpless, an innocent child, wholly reliant on others to learn and grow. He emptied himself of all self-will and pride. He didn't have, he didn't arrive with his own agenda and immediately try and bring change. He simply said, I submit to this culture as a small baby. He had no other choice as a child but to be submitted to the culture. Dr. Longa, I'm just walking through the 4 steps, and then I'll hand it back over to you.
Please just go on. Yeah.
And so from submission, we get into Jesus accepted the people and their culture. And these are,
Matt?
different. Yeah.
I just want to recognize we've had the second coming of Dr. Longa. He's returned.
These are some of the realities of
So
the
you may continue now. I just had to recognize the second coming.
Thank you.
Awesome. So from love, we have submission, and then we have acceptance. And so submission and acceptance are slightly different. We can submit ourselves to a culture, but inwardly be yearning to change it. And so we've submitted to their practices, submitted to their beliefs, submitted to their values, but inwardly we just can't wait to change it all. So we haven't accepted it as valid. We've simply said, I'll submit myself because I need to in order to get to know the people, where acceptance says, I've submitted myself and I accept them as they are. I'm not trying to change them. I'm not trying to make them something that they're not. Not trying to force them to be like me. There is a difference between submission and acceptance. That's why we've separated the two. Because you could submit yourself and still inwardly be dying to just change everything about the person or the people that you're trying to reach. And then the fourth one is assimilation. And this is now so we go from, love is motivation. What is our motivation? Submission is about power. It's an issue of power. Acceptance is an issue of validity. Do we find them valid and their way of life valid? Where assimilation is the issue of equality. So we go just from validity to equality. So from an issue of motivation to an issue of power. Where is the power? Where is the validity? Do we find them valid and the people and their actions valid? But then do we see ourselves as equal? This is where assimilation comes into it. Because now I'm trying to become Kenyan as someone living in Kenya, because I have seen that they are valid, their culture is valid, their way of life is valid, and I have said, you know what, it's equal. America is not better. Kenya is not better. We have an equality, even though there's differences in culture. Some may say there's more sin here than sin here, and it doesn't really matter. There's sin everywhere. And so this then the fourth part of Jesus became a fully Jew as a Jew could be. He was all Hebrew. He followed all of their laws. He did everything. He said, I'm going to be just like these people. And that's how he reached them, as an insider, not as an outsider. And so from there, Dr. Long, I just went through the four levels, the framework of Jesus and cultural humility. So feel free to chime in.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate. Before I ended my first coming, we were just rethinking on those different stages of culture, and I could hear my dear brother Matt, the most African of all the Americans I've ever known. I could hear him say, unless you step into people's worldview, you may not have a relevant message to communicate to them. It's very important. And now this journey into people's worldview, it's been accompanied by two factors. One, in the conception of cultural intelligence, Matt said emotion. This emotion becomes clear in the framework of cultural humility by love. You know, love is key. 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. This is amazing. You know, he could have loved the world by attracting the world to him, but he rather decided to become like us. You know, the general tendency, love here is very tricky. It's not about loving yourself. It's not about wanting people to do things you think it is best for them to do. You know, I've seen many missionaries, many very zealous guys saying, you know, when I'm going to carry out literacy in the whole of this culture, they will know how to read and write English, then I can introduce the gospel to them. This is interesting. The tendency is our expression of love as missionaries, unfortunately, has to do with bringing people in our comfort zone. But Jesus did the opposite. He deprived himself from his amazing glory to become a human. He came to us. So love here has to do with going to people in genuine acceptance. And this is something that is transformational. When love becomes real, the natural byproduct of genuine love is submission. Submission is an expression of love. Unless you love, you can't submit. You know, Jesus submitted himself to our culture. He accepted the unpleasant process of spending 9 months in a woman's womb, a woman he created. I can't imagine being God and spending 9 months in Mary's womb, going through the natural process of birth. And the most striking thing is that he came on the earth he created that did not have room to be welcomed. No hospital was available to welcome him. There was no hostel to welcome him. He was born in a manger. I wouldn't accept my child, and I wouldn't accept this even for my worst enemy. I will never accept my worst enemy to have his child being born in a manger. You know, when we do these things, when we do the Christmas carols, and you know, those little nice pictures, you know, we define the manger as a pleasant place. It's an unpleasant place. It is stinky. No one will want it. He submitted himself and was born in a manger. Because of what? Because he loved us. In the process, he accepted us. He learned our language. He ate our food. He expressed our emotions. The Bible said Jesus cried. Jesus was hungry. You know, all these things are, acceptance. He just took us the way we were. He accepted us. And assimilation. He decided to address to us using our natural images. Jesus could have talked of the kingdom of God using heavenly symbols, but he spoke about the kingdom of God using the mustard seed, you know, using natural things, using elements in our natural environment to facilitate the speech. He said, "You are the salt of the earth," because he knew our mothers used salt every day. He said, "You are the light of the world." He never used a heavenly symbolism to express what he wanted to drive to us. If you don't stop me, I will keep on talking. Let me just have a break here. Yeah.
No, you know what is striking to me is just the radical accommodation when you think of how low God is thinking. Like it's like you and I sinking down to the equivalent of an ant, except it's even further than that. That God would be so humble, his genius is inscrutable to us, and that he would condescend to such simplicity in such humility, it truly is mind-boggling. And that we would be so arrogant to judge another culture so quickly, and that we would so rush into another culture with such arrogance to expect them to immediately uh, respond to my culture and be able to let go of thousands of years of their culture is just so incredibly arrogant. And yet there is a blindness that is so often associated with the work of mission that people don't even perceive it, which is it's hard to believe, but it is very standard. It happens all the time, every day. It's happening right now in literally probably a million places right now. There's Christians that love Jesus that are just running right over people. And so I want to ask you all, I'm curious, like, what are the spiritual disciplines? What are the intellectual practices that you try to cultivate in the people that you're discipling that allow them to get like up and out of that cultural arrogance, be able to see things, to have a higher perspective, that allow them to be able to go, okay, I see this now. What are the spiritual habits or the kind of the intellectual practices that you've seen are really helpful in helping people get in and out, up and out of their own cultural kind of blindness, to be able to see from like Jesus' perspective? You see what I mean? I'm curious, what have you seen? What's been helpful?
Dr. Longa, I'm gonna pass that question over to you. But I'll give you a minute to think about it. I wanna talk about the antithesis of cultural humility, and that also helps Rob with some of what you've just said. And so, Dr. Longa, I'll let you get into that question directly from Rob. So because when we talk about love, submission, acceptance, and assimilation, we're like, yeah, those are good things. I do that. We can justify how maybe we do that in some extent or another. But to get people's eyes open and to help us to understand how maybe we're missing the mark, in the book, we also talk about the antithesis of Jesus' framework. And so we
Okay,
compare and
let's hear it.
contrast, we juxtapose each of them. So, the opposite of love is selfishness.
Yeah.
For us in this component of being culturally humble. If we're not purely loving someone unconditionally, we're trying to get something out of it. We're trying to get, and most of the time what it is, in our church circles, I want to be the one that Rob calls up on stage next week and says, I got someone saved. I want to be the person that's highlighted. I want to be the hero. I want to add to our numbers this year as a church. We want to see 300 people saved. And so I don't really care about you as an individual person that's unsaved. I care about the number that you are. I care about what I can get as an individual, what my church can get from it. And so there's this predominant selfishness within our church circles that is about the numeric. And we just make people numbers and don't make them individuals who we really truly care for. And often that times that'll look like, I'll spend a year with somebody, they don't seem any closer to Jesus, so I just write them off and move on to the next person. I've wasted my time, as opposed to saying, I love you forever. I love you even if you never come to faith, and I'm just going to bless you. And so the opposite of love is selfishness, which we see often. Then when we get into submission, the opposite is pride. And so instead of submitting to the culture, we pridefully say, I know better than you. Do what I do what I say. I know better than you, as opposed to submitting ourselves to learning, to increasing that knowledge of the culture. And that's often this is, and all of these, Rob, are unconscious. They're implicit. Nobody would ever say that they think this way. Nobody would ever believe it. Nobody would ever go into a culture saying, I know better than you. And yet, as you said, it's happening constantly and continually. We have so many Western.
It's like the sin of greed. No one's ever going to say, I'm greedy.
Right.
You can't see it. If you're participating in the sin, you can't see it. You're blind to it. Keep going, brother.
It's a little bit easier to point out selfishness because there's a measurement than it is pride. Because with selfishness, like I said, we're counting numbers. There's these numeric things. With pride, it's really hard. It's quite a bit harder. All of these are very insidious and very hard to identify. But so the opposite of submission is pride, where I come in and say, my way is the best way. My way is better than yours. And then when we get into acceptance, it's rejection. And the rejection can happen in one way: is we outrightly reject you. That's what happened in the Crusades. The Crusades rejected the Arab nations, Saudi people, the Middle East and Northern Africans as valid humans. They just said, you're not even valid. We need to wipe you out. And for that whole Crusade era, we were trying to wipe out a people group because we didn't see them as valid. And then the fourth one was assimilation. Now this is imposition. This is what happened in colonialism. So we said, okay, you're valid. We're not going to wipe you out, but you're not equal to us. We're going to come in and we're going to tell you how to do it, when to do it, what to do. And it is now imposing our will, imposing our way upon you, as opposed to bringing principles, bringing ideas and saying, hey, what would you do with these? Make something beautiful out of it because your culture has so much beauty that we don't even know about. And so we felt in the book it was important for us to identify the antithesis so that we could actually look at a spectrum and say, where am I honestly right now in this spectrum? And if people can do that well, if they have community and if they are able to look honestly at themselves, then it begins to say, oh, it begins to open the eyes, like you had said. It begins to say, oh, I'm off the mark. And then from there, I'll hand it over to Dr. Longa and some of the great work he's done with preparing missionaries for unreached people and different places around the world.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, Dr. Longa. How do you help people gain that ability to view the world, scripture, history, and others through multiple cultural frames of reference? What have you seen become effective in helping them gain cultural humility?
Yeah, thank you, Rob, for coming up with this question. As my brother Matt mentioned, you never realize how selfish you are until you find yourself in a countercultural environment. Your dress code, your diet, just the way you rule out your life are things that are natural inheritance. These are elements that were transferred to us unconsciously. That's just how life is. As my brother Matt said, he grew up, in a setting, and that was the whole world for him. It's the same thing for me. The whole world is where I am. But the moment you step out there and you see people doing things differently, the natural tendency is wanting to correct. It's wanting to have them change. And this is the first thing we want people to realize. When we train missionaries, when we train cross-cultural workers, first we agree on the fact that no one can ever leave his beautiful hometown, his beautiful nation, migrating in another land, without love. Love is the drive behind this. But now, that love has to be sanitized because, most of us moved out there. My first major cross-cultural trip, living from Cameroon to the north of Chad. Can you imagine? We are still in the same continent. We are two neighboring countries, but it's day and night. The cultural distance is so wide because the north of Chad is the middle of the Sahara Desert. People just think differently, they speak differently. I was an alien in the middle of these people. Can you imagine? And the moment you arrive there, you want to change the world around you. You want people to change their way of doing things. And that's when you realize, you need to change. There are things you need to readjust because it doesn't work that way. So one of the things we do is that we associate to the cognitive aspects of the training, this experiential dynamics. People would not understand how culturally illiterate they are, if you accept the word. I know it's not good to say that, but we wouldn't understand how culturally illiterate we are unless we are exposed. So there is no proper training related to culture without exposition. People need to be exposed, and in that exposure, they need to be made vulnerable. When we send our students practicals, we make sure they don't have enough money in themselves to go and eat in a restaurant. They will have to eat what their host families has provided. And when you resist it for a week, then you know the second week you have to try to taste it. And that's how it becomes. Really, it has to be something intentional. You don't embrace additional culture. You don't accept others, naturally. It has to be intentional. It's really something you need to be coached in the process. It doesn't happen intuitively, you know. We, we don't. This culture, this pride is deep into our souls. Our attitude to reject the way people think and act, it's just attached to our human nature, you know. Uh, our tendency to impose the way we do things is just attached to us. I was mentoring a couple in a very remote area in the north of Nigeria, and they were to get married, and I discovered they never talked about the ring, the wedding ring. So my wife and I decided to buy the wedding ring. And on the day of the wedding, we gave them the ring. And the whole place was so sad when they saw the rings coming out of us. They obeyed us by wearing the rings, but in the process, they removed their rings and literally threw it away. They threw the rings away, the wedding rings away. My wife and I were so frustrated because we bought those rings, and after some little research, we came to understand that only witches and wizards wear rings in that community. And by giving them the rings, we were introducing them into witchcraft. Can you imagine? We want to impose things on us.
Whoops.
I need to stop here because the stories are so many. And unless people are intentionally driven into cultural intelligence, they will not experience cultural humility. They need coaching. There is a need for coaching. We are still in that journey, but we believe we have done for a couple of steps to be able to, drive others in the process.
Amen.
Yeah.
And exposure and experience doesn't have to be halfway around the world. As you said, Rob, at the beginning, when we were talking, most of our major cities in the States right now, most of the major cities around the world, if you want to, you can find a mosque, you can find a Baha'i temple, you can find a Jewish synagogue, you can find people who are worshiping other gods and just go and hang out with them and just be present and just watch and doesn't even have to be in one of their worship services. You can just find somebody who's different than you. In one of the trainings that I do, I challenge everybody. There's 8 different things, race, ethnicity, age, language, gender. And I say, find someone who has 4 of the 8 different and ask them for an interview. And I give them the questions and just go and talk to somebody who's different and say, hey, I'm doing this learning and training. I'm trying to grow my cultural humility. I would love just to get to know your story. Just ask some questions about you. Most people love to talk about themselves. And they're like, yeah, sure, I'd love to spend an hour with you. And it's not for anything else than just gathering information and putting yourself in a place where you're in the minority, whether it's, again, age, race, ethnicity, whatever, gender, and just watch people, obviously in a place where it's comfortable and it's safe, all of that. But there's ways to be intentional without having to spend money, without having to go to another country. And it just takes the ability to open our eyes to say, not everybody's like me. And there are places and these are people that I could go and begin to learn and ask questions about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, as we kind of bring things to a close here, a final word from each one of you. What would be just one practice or one posture that you would recommend as a starting point for those that are either listening right now or maybe they're potentially watching this and they're wondering, okay, I want to start the journey. What would be one practice or one posture that you would encourage them to begin with?
Dr. Longa?
Yeah, this is big. Yeah, I was just thinking, being intelligent, Rob, means knowing a lot of things about something. This is what makes you an intelligent person. You know a lot of things. You know almost everything about something. We call you an intelligent person. But being culturally intelligent has to do with knowing something about everything. You know, get to know something about everything. Expand your scope. Get to get to uh, learn to have an eye on what your neighbor is going through. The media are very good. You know, sometimes media have a biased narrative. They have an orientation where everyone wants. Just let's go beyond media and just go next to that neighbor. It's not because he has beard. He's wearing a hijab. He's wearing a garment that is a no. Sometimes when you see a guy like that, oh, that's a terrorist. No, sorry for using this word. No, just get to draw yourself closer to the person. Get to know him. Move towards someone. Go beyond your biases and get to know the person. People are more wonderful than the images the world is portraying. Let's step out of our comfort zone and let's begin to have a taste of what people are. We will discover treasures, in this wonderful creatures God made.
Mm. Amen. Thank you.
Yeah, I would add go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, how about you, Matt?
Yeah, I would add, as you're connecting with people, you had mentioned the discipline. I'd say the discipline of hospitality. Exchange meals, but in your home and in their home. Because in some cultures, people to invite you into their home is the honor. They don't want to come to your house. They want to have you in their home, and they want to cook everything for you, and they want you to enjoy all of their ethnic meals and their food and their culture and cuisine. In some places, it's the other way around. If you invite someone into your home, you have honored them. You have shown them that you respect them. You have shown them that they're valid and that they're equals and that you desire to know them. And so figure it out which way it is and then exchange, once a month, once a week, have the discipline of hospitality and invite somebody who doesn't look like you, think like you, has a different background, maybe different languages, and share a meal together, but not in a neutral space that's a restaurant or a coffee shop. That's a neutral space. And even that's not a neutral space. Power dynamics, all these other things. But having people who are different into your home and going into their home, that's where a lot of beautiful conversations and a lot of learning can happen. And you get a meal. It's win-win.
Come on. And let me just say to everyone, please go. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Longa. What do you want to say?
I wanted to say nothing serious happens outside a meal. You need that meal on the table. Yeah.
And please, everybody, please, I encourage you to open up The Church in Context, Harnessing Cultural Humility for Kingdom Advancement. That's a book that you can download and open up today. And Matt, please, would you invite everybody to the adventure that you and Dr. Longa are going to be leading? Can you tell them about it?
For sure. I'd love to. And so one of the ways we're helping churches and leaders and leadership teams to step into this journey of cultural humility is we're putting on an experience. Based on the content of the book, we're having a 6-day immersion journey in Turkey. We're going to be in Western Turkey where the churches of Revelation are, Ephesus is, Colossia, Laodicea. And we're going to walk people through a multicultural global cohort. We're going to walk them through these spaces, and we're going to look at 3 different contexts. We're going to look at the historical context. What did the writers of the New Testament, what were they talking about at that time? How does that look in this same place 2,000 years later? And then what does all of this mean for our home context? And so we want to journey with people. Dr. Longa and I, another friend of ours from South Africa, want to help people begin to practice the art of contextualization, not just know the knowledge, not just understand the concepts, but live it, experience it, and then begin to reproduce it in others. And so that's August 30th through September 6th. We're still taking registrations, and we would love to have as many people as possible come through that.
Well, listen, if this episode stirred something in you, please come on over to the Substack. That's starfishu.substack.com. And we will have more information about the trip there. Also, we'll have links to the places where you can dig into and learn more from Matt and also from Dr. Longa. And we hope that you will join this bigger journey, one where humility and presence can open new pathways to this kingdom life in every culture. And there's only one who is worthy of the worship of every tribe, every tongue, every nation, and his name is Jesus. And thank you for joining this conversation today. Thank you, Dr. Longa. Thank you, Matt. Grace and peace, brothers.
Yeah,
thank you, Ralph.